I just watched the 2018 film Burning, directed by Chang-dong, and was stunned by its visual beauty and subtle storytelling. To say the film had a profound impact on me is a bit of an understatement. Days after watching, all I could think about was the movie. I would replay scenes in my head, theorize to myself about what it all meant. I was so taken by the world and narrative that was crafted in the film, I decided to read the short story it was loosely based on. Barn Burning by Murakami, released in 1983 as a part of his short story collection, The Elephant Vanishes, shares a lot of similarities with the film, while also being vastly different. What surprised me most was how the same skeleton produced two very different pieces of art. The short story, running only about 20 pages in length, floored me with its unique atmosphere. While not as subtle as the film, I did enjoy some of the quieter moments throughout, like the description of the female lead miming a tangerine, which, through its prose, allowed us to sit with the act for much longer. Reading it, I was shocked to see how much of it was expanded upon in the film. There were a couple of scenes that remained largely unchanged, like the scene of the two male leads smoking and talking outside of his house, or the aforementioned mime scene. However, I believe that the vast amount of differences between the two stems from each story's respective thematic goals. One of the major differences is the framing of the main male lead. Unnamed in the short story, but called Lee Jong-soo in the film, he's no longer an old friend of Hae-mi, but instead is a 31-year-old family man who recently met her. In the film, we get a much more subdued version of his character. Most of his shining character moments are when you see him as he silently does something, such as masturbating in Hae-mi's room multiple times, watching Ben's reactions to his girlfriends, or even his methodical burning of Ben's car. Like when the main character says that he's not sure if the act itself is strange, but he wants to understand why he burns down barns, because it indicates a clear difference between the two of them as people. While we're on the topic of that conversation, I was surprised to see how much of it was intact in the adaptation. Aside from slight differences in how it's literally conveyed, the conversation is mostly the same. We get some insight into the fleeting nature of memory, when the main character is thinking about a play he was in when he was younger, later realizing he can't remember the outcome, as well as the thematically relevant discussion about the other male lead's hobby, asking if he's the one that judges if the barns are expendable, to which he replies that it isn't up to him, and that the act itself is almost natural. Hae-mi in the short story is much less of a character than in the film. There still lies her carefree attitude and search for freedom, but there are no traces of her search for meaning. In it, her trip to Africa is now in Algeria instead of Kenya, and she gets to go because of some money she got from her recently deceased father. There is no discussion as to why she wants to visit or how it was when she was there. No mention of her belief in the idea of a great versus small hunger. In the short story, we can only barely infer a sexual relationship between her and the main character. We get some mention of her previous romantic encounters, when the main character comments on her getting money to fund her lifestyle from various boyfriends, later confirming that he became just like them. Aside from the mention that the two would hang out and occasionally chat, there were only two explicit conversations between them in the entire story. One was her showcasing her miming skills, and the other was her indifference to knowing what Ben's character did for work. All of this led to an empty character that was more of a vessel for the male characters to both act because of and act towards. Ben's character is what I think was most expertly expanded upon in the adaptation. In the film, he's a mysterious, enigmatic character that feels like he's hiding something sinister behind each smirk he flashes at Lee Jong-soo. In the short, he is again much less of a character and more of a representational figure. He's in the story more than Hae-mi's character, but his presence is simply the core character beats from the film without the layers. For example, the scene in the restaurant after Lee Jong-soo picks him up from the airport feels rich in its ability to convey each of the three characters' roles. The reserved and envious nature of Lee Jong-soo, spontaneity and freedom from Hae-mi, and Ben's veneer of civility, shrouded by mystery, is all at the forefront because of how much it has been extended. In the short story, the entire restaurant scene is only 8 sentences long, including the last 3 about their departure. In it, we learn that Ben's character is in the import-export business, and that the main character assumes that he just doesn't want to talk about his job. Gone is Hae-mi's emotional outburst, and Ben's subsequent comment on his fascination with humans crying, one of the most telling aspects of his character. We get another conversation right after, where the two are discussing Ben's employment. Hae-mi doesn't seem to know anything about it, and the main character theorizes about his wealth, making the same reference to Gatsby, this time internal instead of spoken to her. With reference to the Great Gatsby in the short story, it was much more literal, and without the subtext of the film. In the film, there is palpable class commentary being made, when Lee Jung-soo talks about South Korea being filled with Gatsbys, with a sort of visible disgust at the thought. The class disparity between the two is much less apparent in the short story. We don't know exactly what the main character does and how well off he is. However, we can assume that based on him having a house and supposedly supporting his wife and children, that he must be doing much better than his film counterpart. The fundamental thematic difference is why I believe they end in different ways. One ends in a wistful longing to understand where Hae-mi's character has gone, leading the main character to search the barns near his house for a year, hoping that what Ben said was true, which would ultimately confirm Hae-mi's character being alive. In the film, we, just as Lee Jung-soo, are sure of Ben's guilt. We see through his eyes all the evidence he's gathered, and while there may be some reservations, the story leads us to the same conclusion. Instead of longing for answers, he believes he's arrived at one. In the end, the relationship between the movie and the short story is clear. Ben's character describes the burning of barns as natural, beyond judgment. The film then mirrors this logic back to us. Killing Ben becomes in itself another one of these acts. The inevitable violence is born from the glimpses of envy and suspicion we've seen throughout the film, and with that, Lee Jung-soo and we as viewers are left to recognize violence itself as natural.